The train from St. Louis brought more than just mail and supplies to Casper, Wyoming in the spring of 1887. It brought a scandal, wearing a lilac dress and holding a single suitcase. On the platform, a man took one look at her visible pregnancy, turned, and walked away forever. What happened next wasn't a rescue, it was a claim. Her name was Elena Vance, 27, and in the eyes of the frontier, she was now ruined goods. But a widowed rancher named Thomas McReady saw something else, a solution to his own loneliness and a radical, permanent answer to the inheritance of his land. He stepped forward, not with pity, but with a proposition that would bind her unborn child to his name forever. This is the true story of a claim that defied every convention and the family it built from a broken beginning. Elena's journey to that platform began months earlier in a Philadelphia drawing room with a secret she believed would secure her future, not destroy it. She was engaged to Robert Pendleton, the son of a railroad magnate. The pregnancy, confirmed just 2 weeks before the wedding, was met not with panic, but with a cold, calculated plan from Robert. He would marry her, the child would be born early, and their society would whisper, but never dare to accuse. It was a transaction, one Elena accepted to avoid the abyss of shame that awaited an unwed mother. But Robert's courage evaporated the closer the wedding came. The whispers in his club, the imagined laughter behind gloved hands, it became a price too high for his pride. He sent a telegram to her family home 1 week before the ceremony. It contained 3 words, "I cannot proceed." Her father, a bankrupted merchant, saw his last hope for financial salvation dissolve. He gave Elena a choice no woman should face, a distant aunt's charity in Boston where she would give birth in secrecy and surrender the child, or the West. A new name, a clean slate. He had heard of men in the territories who asked few questions. That is how she found herself on the train to Casper, Wyoming, with a fabricated story of widowhood and a letter of introduction to Mr. Thomas McReady. The letter, written by her father, omitted her condition. It spoke only of a respectable, educated woman seeking a fresh start, skilled in management and correspondence. It was a lie wrapped in stationery, and Elena carried it like a lead weight. Thomas McReady was 42. His wife Claire had died 3 years prior from consumption, leaving him with a working cattle ranch, the Bar M, and 4 children under the age of 10. The oldest boy, Jacob, was 9. The twins, Mary and Michael, were 7. The youngest, a girl named Ruth, was just 5. Grief had hardened into a grim endurance. The ranch was solvent, but the house was a chaos of loneliness and unmet needs. A local woman came by day, but the nights were long, and the children's eyes held a hollow look he didn't know how to fill. He wasn't looking for love, he was looking for help. The advertisement he'd placed in several Eastern papers was blunt: "Widower, Wyoming, seeks woman of sturdy character for marriage and management of household. Children must not fear hard work or isolation." References exchanged. When Elena's letter arrived, speaking of loss and a desire for purpose, it seemed like providence. Her handwriting was elegant, her tone resigned but firm. He wrote back, offering travel fare and a partnership. He believed he was getting a competent, childless widow. The moment she stepped onto the platform, the truth was undeniable. The tailored lilac dress could not hide the gentle, undeniable curve of her abdomen. Robert Pendleton took one look, his face draining of all color, turned on his heel and vanished into the crowd. He had followed her west, not to reconcile, but to see the rumor with his own eyes, to finally kill his own guilt. His departure was the final, public nail in her coffin. Elena stood utterly alone, the dust from the departing train coating her shoes. The entire town seemed to be watching from behind curtains and storefront windows. This was the disaster she had been sent west to avoid. Then, Thomas McReady pushed through the station door. He was taller than she expected, his face weathered beneath a broad-brimmed hat, his posture not of a man rushing to rescue, but of one assessing a broken fence. He walked up to her, his eyes moving from her face to her suitcase, then resting, just for a moment, on her midsection. The silence stretched. He didn't offer his arm, he didn't smile. "The letter," he said, his voice gravelly. It failed to mention an heir. Elena's chin trembled, but she held it up. "The child is mine. It complicates nothing for you. I was misinformed of my fiancé's character, that is all." Thomas studied her, the defiance in her eyes, the clear shame warring with pride. He saw the expensive, now dusty dress, the fine bones of her face. He also saw the raw, desperate courage it took to stand there. He thought of his motherless children, of the empty house, of the long, silent years stretching ahead. He thought of land and legacy and the stubborn will to survive against long odds. It complicates everything, he said finally, but a complication isn't always a curse. Come, the wagon's this way. The ride to the Bar M was made in near-total silence. The prairie was vast, swallowing the town whole. Elena watched the endless grass, her mind numb. Thomas spoke only once, pointing to a hawk circling overhead. He owns the sky, he said, and nothing else. It felt like a statement of principle. The ranch house was a long, low structure of timber and stone, sturdy but weathered. As the wagon rolled into the yard, 4 small faces appeared in the window, then vanished. The door opened and they emerged, lined up on the porch like a wary committee. Jacob, the 9-year-old, stood protectively in front of his siblings, his expression a mirror of his father's guarded stoicism. Thomas stepped down. "This is Elena," he said. "She'll be staying." No one moved, no one smiled. The twins, Mary and Michael, stared openly at Elena's stomach. Little Ruth hid behind Jacob's leg. Inside, the house was clean but profoundly untended. A basket of mending overflowed in a corner. Books and wooden blocks lay scattered. The air smelled of stale bread and wood smoke. Thomas showed her to a small room off the kitchen. It was spare, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window looking out on the barn. "This is yours," he said. "We'll speak after supper." The meal was a quiet, agonizing affair. Beans, salt pork, and hard biscuits. The children ate quickly, their eyes flicking between their father and the strange woman. Elena picked at her food, her appetite gone. After the plates were cleared, Thomas nodded to Jacob, "Take the others upstairs." When they were gone, he sat at the table, motioning for Elena to do the same. He placed his hands flat on the worn wood. "Here is the situation," he said. "You have no money, no reputation, and a child coming that has no name. I have a need for a wife in the truest, most practical sense. Someone to raise my children, to keep this house, to be a partner in the labor of this land. The marriage would be legal, it would be binding, but it would not be conventional." "What are your terms?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The child you carry," he said, his gaze steady. "When it is born, I will claim it as my own. Legally, I will add its name to the ranch deed, as I have for my own 4. It will inherit a full, equal share of the Bar M, now and when I am gone. No one, not the child, not the world, will ever know any different." Elena felt the room tilt. He wasn't offering to ignore her shame. He was offering to erase it at a monumental cost. "You would do that? Give a stranger's child your name, your land?" "It's not a stranger's child," he said. "It would be my child. The moment we say our vows, that is the agreement. You give this child a father and a future. You give my children a mother. You give me a helpmate. In return, you get security, a home, and a name that can't be taken away by gossip." "And what of affection?" Elena dared to ask. Thomas looked toward the stairs, where the soft sounds of the children settling could be heard. "Affection," he said slowly, "is something that grows, like a crop. It needs good ground and work and time. I can't promise you that. I can promise you respect. And I can promise you that in this house, you will not be judged." It was the coldest, most honest proposal she would ever receive. That night, lying in the narrow bed, Elena placed a hand on her swelling belly. She thought of the orphanage, of a life of servitude, of her child being labeled a bastard forever. Here was a man offering not just shelter, but a legacy. He was buying her condition, and in doing so, giving her power she never thought she'd have again. They were married by a traveling judge 2 days later. No family attended. The children stood as witnesses, confused and silent. Elena wore a simple gray dress. Thomas wore his one clean shirt. The vows were spoken without emotion. Afterward, he handed her a plain gold band. It was cool and heavy on her finger. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful adjustment. The children were not hostile, but they were not welcoming. Jacob, in particular, watched her with a simmering resentment, seeing her as an intruder, a poor replacement for the mother he still desperately missed. Elena tried. She attempted to cook, burning a batch of stew. She tried to mend, pricking her fingers until they bled. The house, with its memories of another woman, seemed to resist her at every turn. One afternoon, struggling to lift a heavy sack of flour into the pantry, her grip slipped. The sack hit the floor with a solid thump, bursting open and sending a cloud of white dust billowing across the kitchen. She stood frozen, covered in flour, expecting the sigh of disappointment, the sharp word she had come to anticipate from her own father. Thomas walked in from the yard. He stopped, looked at the mess, then at her flour-dusted face. Without a word, he fetched the broom. He handed it to her, handle first. Then he bent, took hold of the nearly empty sack, and hoisted it the rest of the way onto the shelf with ease. "Start smaller," he said. "There's a half sack in the barn." And with that, he walked back out. It wasn't kindness, it was instruction, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't mocked, he had simply shown her a better way. A small, hard seed of something, not love, not yet, but perhaps trust, pushed its first root into the dry ground of her new life. She began to learn. She asked Mary about her favorite wildflowers. She let Michael show her how to collect eggs without startling the hens. She sat with Ruth on the porch at dusk, singing the few lullabies she could remember. Slowly, the house began to change. Fresh curtains appeared at the windows. Meals became more regular. Laughter, timid at first, echoed again in the halls. Thomas observed it all from a distance. He saw the way her back straightened as she gained confidence. He saw the dark circles under her eyes begin to fade. He saw his daughter, Ruth, one night clutch not a forgotten shawl of her mother, but the skirt of Elena's dress as she fell asleep. One evening, he found her at his late wife's writing desk, carefully reviewing the ranch's account ledgers. She had found errors, small discrepancies that had cost them money. She looked up, worried she'd overstepped. He simply nodded. "Good," he said, "that's good." But the peace was fragile. The town of Casper had not forgotten the scene at the train station. Whispers followed Thomas when he went for supplies. Judgmental glances were thrown Elena's way on the rare Sunday they attended church. The story of the pregnant bride and the widower who took her in was too juicy to forget. It was only a matter of time before that outside pressure found its way to their door. The catalyst arrived with the first cold snap of autumn. A letter came for Elena, postmarked from Philadelphia. It was from Robert Pendleton's mother. It was brief, vicious, and written with the precise pen of society's condemnation. It accused Elena of entrapping her son with a child that might not even be his, of fleeing east to trick a desperate man into raising another's bastard, and of dragging the Pendleton name through the mud. The letter ended with a threat. If Elena ever attempted to contact Robert or claim any connection to their family, they would expose her true character to her new husband and the entire Wyoming territory. Elena read the letter on the porch, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. All her fears, the shame she thought she'd left on that platform, came crashing back. This was the world's judgment, delivered directly to her new home. It held the power to unravel everything: Thomas's respect, the children's fragile trust, the future he had promised her child. She didn't hear Thomas come up behind her. He took the letter from her numb fingers. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he didn't look at her. He folded the letter neatly, then held it over the lit lantern on the porch rail. The paper caught, curling into black ash that floated away on the wind. "They have no power here," he said, his voice low and final. But the action, while defiant, changed nothing. The poison was now in the air between them. The carefully built foundations of their arrangement trembled. That night, as a hard wind whistled around the corners of the house, Thomas finally asked the question that had hung over them since the beginning. He found her in the kitchen, staring out at the dark. "The letter," he said. "The father, does he know?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "He knows. He chose not to be involved. That choice was made before I ever boarded the train." Thomas was silent for a long time. "And if he changes his mind, if he comes here looking for what's his?" She turned to face him, the full weight of her vulnerability in her eyes. "What is his, Thomas? He rejected it. You claimed it. The law may see nuances, but this child will only ever know one father, the one who was there, the one who chose us." Her use of the word "us" hung in the cold air. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, not as a problem to be solved or a helper to be managed, but as a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, offering him the only thing she had left, her trust. And in that moment, he realized the walls of their business arrangement had crumbled. They were now in something far more dangerous and far more real. He didn't answer. He simply reached out, took the empty cup from her hand, and placed it in the wash basin. "Get some rest," he said. "The first snow is coming." But as Elena lay awake, listening to the wind, she knew the storm had already arrived. The outside world had breached their walls, and the true test of Thomas McReady's claim, not just on paper, but in his heart, was about to begin. The first snow did come, a brittle, whispery fall that iced the windows and deepened the silence between them. The burned letter had been a declaration of war against the past, but the battle lines were now drawn inside the house. Jacob, the eldest, had overheard enough on the porch to understand a threat had arrived. He confronted Elena the next morning while she was alone in the kitchen, his small fists clenched at his sides. "That man back east," he said, his voice trembling with a confusion that looked like anger. "Is he coming to take you away?" Elena knelt, ignoring the ache in her back. "No one is taking me away, Jacob. This is my home." "But you're not our real mother," he blurted out, then looked instantly horrified at his own words, as if he'd given voice to a forbidden thought. Elena didn't flinch. "You're right," she said softly. "I'm not. I could never replace her, but I can be here now with you if you'll let me." The boy's defiance crumbled into ragged, silent tears. Elena didn't hug him. She knew he would stiffen. She simply handed him a potato to peel. "Keep your hands busy," she said. "It helps." Side by side, they worked in silence, and a fragile new understanding was patched together, not with words, but with shared labor. Winter sealed them in. The winds howled across the prairie, piling drifts against the barn. The world shrank to the walls of the house, the crackle of the fire, and the inevitable growing proof of Elena's pregnancy. As her body changed, the practical reality of Thomas's claim became a daily, visible fact. He never mentioned it, but his actions shifted. He began bringing in firewood without being asked, ensuring her path to the privy was cleared of ice. One evening, he came back from town with a bag of oranges, a rare and expensive luxury. He placed them on the table without comment. The children's eyes went wide. Elena understood the message. She and the baby were worth the extra coin. The intimacy of confinement worked on them all. Elena started reading aloud to the children in the evenings from a book of frontier histories. Thomas would often linger in the doorway, listening, his carving knife still in his hand. One night, the story was about a snowbound expedition. When she finished, Michael, one of the twins, asked, "Pa, were you ever that lost?" Thomas stepped into the firelight. "Once," he said, his eyes finding Elena's, "before I found my way." The moment was broken by a sudden, sharp gasp from Elena. She felt the baby kick, a strong, unmistakable flutter. Her hands flew to her belly. The children stared. Ruth scrambled over. "What is it? Is it sick?" Elena smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed her face. "No, sweetheart, he's just saying hello." Jacob asked, skeptical. "Or she," Elena said, her laugh a soft, warm sound in the quiet room. "We shall see." Thomas watched her, watched the wonder on her face, watched his children's curiosity overcome their caution. He saw the way Mary gently placed a small hand on Elena's stomach, waiting for a movement. In that moment, the child ceased to be an abstract term in a contract. It became a person, a future member of this makeshift family, announced by a kick under his own roof. The wall he'd built around his heart developed its first crack. But the outside world had not forgotten them. The threat in the burned letter materialized in a different, more insidious form. A lawyer from Cheyenne, a Mr. Dobbs, arrived one iron-gray afternoon in late February. He was a thin man with spectacles and a condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes. He claimed to be conducting land title surveys for the territory. Thomas received him on the porch, refusing him entry. After pleasantries, Dobbs's tone shifted. "There are questions, Mr. McReady, regarding the clarity of your inheritance line. With a new wife and the anticipated addition to the family, some are concerned about the dilution of assets for your existing heirs. Certain parties back east have expressed a desire to ensure all is in order." Thomas's expression was granite. "My family affairs are in order. My will is clear. Every child under my roof is my heir, equally. Of course, Dobbs said smoothly, but in cases of uncertain paternity, territorial law can be complex. A biological father, should he ever come forward, might have a claim. It could tie up your land in courts for years, bankrupt you in legal fees. I represent clients who wish to avoid such messy futures. They are prepared to make a generous offer for the Bar M. It would provide a clean, uncomplicated future for you and your undeniable children. It was a velvet-gloved threat. Robert Pendleton's family wasn't trying to claim the child. They were trying to scare Thomas into selling, to erase the problem altogether by removing Elena and her baby from the equation. They were attacking through the land, the one thing Thomas was sure of. "Get off my property," Thomas said, his voice low and dangerous. Dobbs tipped his hat. "Consider the offer, sir. Uncertainty is a poor legacy." The visit left a poison in the air far worse than the first letter. This was no social shame. This was a financial and legal siege. That night, Thomas spread his own deed and will out on the table. Elena watched him, her face pale. "Can they do that?" she asked, her voice small. "They can try," Thomas grunted, tracing a line on the parchment with a calloused finger. "The law here is still being written, but a claim from a wealthy man back east, a judge might listen." "What can we do?" Thomas looked up at her, and for the first time she saw not just determination, but a flicker of fear. "We make it undeniable," he said. "We make you so much a part of this land that trying to separate you from it would be like trying to pull up a century-old oak by its roots." He began the very next day. He took her to the county clerk's office in Casper, a first since their wedding. He filed a formal amendment to his land deed, adding her name, Elena McReady, as a joint owner. The clerk, an elderly man who remembered Thomas's first wife, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The transaction cost a significant amount in fees. Thomas paid in gold coin without blinking. Then he did something even more profound. He gathered the children in the front room. He held up the family Bible, a thick, leather-bound book. "We are adding a name," he said. He opened it to the family registry page. Under his own marriage to Claire, he drew a firm line. Below it, he wrote, "Thomas McReady married Elena Vance, November 12, 1887. Then, on the births page, after the entries for his 4 children, he left a space. He looked at Elena. "When the time comes," he said, "you will write it. You will choose the name." He was giving her the pen. He was giving her the authority to inscribe her child officially into the history of his family. It was a symbolic act, but in the world of the frontier, the family Bible was law. Elena took the quill, her hand steady for the first time in weeks. She did not write yet, but she placed the quill back in the inkwell with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. The lawyer's visit, however, had stirred the hornet's nest in Casper. Gossip, now fueled by whispers of legal trouble and Eastern money, became brazen. At church the following Sunday, Mrs. Gable, the bank manager's wife, pointedly asked Elena when she was due, adding, "That was a quick blessing after your wedding, wasn't it?" A titter ran through the group of women around her. Elena felt the old shame rise like bile, but before she could form a response, Thomas, who was standing with the men nearby, did something extraordinary. He walked over, not to Elena, but to Mrs. Gable. His voice carried in the sudden hush. "My wife's health is a private matter," he said, his tone courteous but cold as iron. "But since you're so interested, the baby is due in May. We consider it a late spring gift." He then offered his arm to Elena. "Shall we go? The sermon today was about charity. I think we've heard enough." It was a public, unequivocal endorsement. He had not just defended her, he had claimed the timeline, owned the narrative. The ride home was silent, but the air between them on the wagon seat was electric with something new, a united front. Winter finally began to loosen its grip. The snow melted, revealing muddy earth and the first brave green shoots. Elena's time grew near. The reality of birth, of bringing a new life into this tense, embattled world, became a pressing fear. One afternoon, as she struggled to hem a tiny gown, her nerves frayed. "What if something goes wrong?" she said aloud, not meaning to. Thomas, who was mending a harness at the table, looked up. "It won't." "You can't know that." "I do," he said, putting down his awl, "because I won't let it. I've sent for the doctor from Laramie. He'll stay in town when your time is close. I've already paid him." The expense must have been staggering. Elena stared at him. Why are you doing all this? The deed, the Bible, now a doctor from 50 miles away. Our agreement was for a name and a roof. Thomas stood up, his frame filling the small room. He walked to the window, looking out at his land. That agreement, he said slowly, was made by a man who was half dead, a man who thought he was buying a solution. He turned to face her. I am not that man anymore. This, he gestured between them at the house toward the children's room. This is no longer an agreement. It is my family, and I protect what's mine. It was the closest he had ever come to a declaration of feeling. The word mine hung in the air, no longer about property, but about possession of the heart. Elena felt something unlock within her, a dam of guarded emotion finally breaking. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, tears welling in her eyes for the first time, not from sorrow, but from a relief so profound it was dizzying. The thaw brought another, less welcome visitor, not a lawyer, but Robert Pendleton himself. He arrived on a sleek bay horse, his clothes travel-worn but finely made. He had the haunted, desperate look of a man running from his own conscience. Thomas met him at the property line, rifle not pointed, but held prominently in the crook of his arm. Robert dismounted, holding up his hands. I'm not here for trouble, McReady. I need to speak with Elena. She has nothing to say to you. Please, Robert said, and his voice broke. It's not about claims or money. My mother, her letter. I didn't know she'd done that. I've called off the lawyers. I need to see her. I need to know she's all right. Thomas studied him, seeing not a predatory rival, but a weak, regretful boy. The most dangerous kind. Wait here, he said. He went inside and told Elena, who had been watching from the window. She went pale, then a flush of anger rose on her cheeks. She walked out onto the porch, Thomas a solid presence behind her. Robert took a step forward, his eyes drinking her in, lingering on her swollen belly, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and wonder. Elena, he breathed. What do you want, Robert? To make things right, I was a coward. I'm prepared to do my duty. Here, now, we can still be married. Elena let out a short, incredulous laugh that held no humor. Your duty was to stand by me 8 months ago on a platform in Philadelphia or even on a platform in Casper. Your duty is not a thing you can offer like a belated train ticket. You rejected your duty, and in doing so, you surrendered all claim to it. But the child is not yours, Elena said, her voice like steel. He is Thomas McReady's son, in every way that will ever matter. Robert flinched as if struck. He looked past her to Thomas, who hadn't moved, his expression impassive. You've convinced him of that, have you? Bought his silence with this dirt. Thomas moved then. He walked down the porch steps, stopping just before Robert. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't raise his voice. He said, you had a treasure. You threw it in the dirt and walked away. I picked it up. I polished it. I learned its value. Now you see it shining and you want it back. You don't get to want. You forfeited that right. Get on your horse. If you come near my wife or my land again, the law won't be what you need to worry about. The two men stared at each other, one representing the brittle authority of the old world, the other the fierce, possessive law of the new. Robert's shoulders slumped. He looked at Elena one last time, a look of utter, final loss, then mounted his horse and rode away, back toward the east and the life of cowardice he had chosen. Elena watched him go until he was a speck on the prairie. She expected to feel triumph or vindication. She felt only a vast, empty pity, and then she felt a sharp, clamping pain in her abdomen, so intense it stole her breath. She gripped the porch post, her knuckles white. Thomas was at her side in an instant. Elena. The baby, she gasped, as a wave of pain receded, only to be followed by another, stronger one. It's time. But it was too early, a month too early. The doctor from Laramie was not in town. The sky, which had been clear, was now darkening with the bruised purple clouds of a spring storm. They were on their own. Thomas's promise, I won't let it, was about to be tested against the brutal, indifferent mechanics of life and death on the frontier. He carried her inside as the first cold drops of rain began to fall. The crisis they had feared was now upon them, and the true cost of his claim was due. The storm broke with a violence that shook the house, and Elena's labor settled into a rhythm that was all wrong. The pains were too close together, too sharp, with no steady build. Thomas carried her to their bed, his face a mask of controlled panic. The children, terrified by the shouts and the howling wind, huddled in the main room. Jacob, to his credit, took charge. He stoked the fire, put water on to boil, and held the twins close. Thomas had delivered calves and foals, but this was a universe of difference. He followed Elena's gasped instructions, his hands, so capable with leather and iron, feeling clumsy and enormous. Hours bled together. The kerosene lamp threw frantic shadows on the wall. Elena's strength began to fade. The baby, coming too soon, was in distress. "You have to push, Elena," Thomas urged, wiping her brow with a damp cloth. She shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. "I can't. Something's wrong." He knew it too. There was a desperate, silent communication between them that bypassed all their previous contracts. He made a decision. "Jacob," he shouted. The boy appeared in the doorway, pale but steady. "Take the rifle. Ride to the Henderson place. Their girl had a baby last year. Fetch Mrs. Henderson. Now, don't stop for anything." Jacob didn't question. He was gone into the lashing rain, a small figure swallowed by the darkness. It was a 7-mile ride over treacherous ground. Thomas knew it was a slim hope. He turned back to Elena. Her eyes were fluttering closed. "No, look at me. You stay with me. You hear? This child is coming. You are both coming through this." He didn't know if he was giving an order or a prayer. He positioned himself to help, guided by some deep, primal instinct. When the final, terrifying moment came, it was not a cry that filled the room, but a terrible, fragile silence. A tiny, bluish boy lay in Thomas's trembling hands, limp and still. Elena gave a weak, broken sound. Thomas acted without thought. He cleared the baby's mouth with his finger. He rubbed the tiny chest with a rough, gentle thumb. He breathed 2 small puffs of air into the miniature rosebud mouth. He had seen a rancher do this for a newborn lamb once. He prayed it worked for a child. A shudder, a gasp, then a thin, reedy cry pierced the noisy chaos of the storm. It was the most beautiful sound Thomas McReady had ever heard. He wrapped the baby in a clean flour sack and placed him on Elena's chest. She wept, her tears mingling with the sweat on her skin. "He's so small," she whispered. "But he's here," Thomas said, his own voice thick. "He's here and he's fighting." The immediate crisis had passed, but the danger had not. The afterbirth was not right. Elena began to bleed heavily. The relief in the room curdled back into cold fear. Thomas pressed towels against her, applying pressure as she grew paler, her grip on consciousness fading. Where was Jacob? Where was help? It felt like an eternity later that the door burst open. Jacob stood there, soaked and shivering, but behind him was not old Mrs. Henderson, but a young Mexican woman named Maria, the Hendersons' hired help. She took in the scene with one sharp glance, pushed past Thomas, and got to work. She spoke little English, but her hands were sure and swift. She administered a bitter tea from a pouch at her belt, massaged Elena's abdomen, and staunched the bleeding with clean linen and firm pressure. She cooed to the tiny baby, showing Elena how to help him latch and feed despite his frailty. By dawn, the storm had blown itself out. Elena was asleep, exhausted but stable, the baby a small, sleeping bundle in the crook of her arm. Maria was boiling more water in the kitchen. Thomas found Jacob asleep at the table, his head on his arms. He covered his son with a blanket, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it hurt. He paid Maria with silver dollars and a sack of coffee. She nodded, her job done. As she left, she looked at Thomas and said in halting English, "The mama, she is strong. The boy, he is stronger because of you. You gave him breath." Thomas stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the wet prairie in gold and pink. He had faced down lawyers and jealous former suitors, but those were man-made threats. This had been a raw fight against nature itself, and they had won. He felt, for the first time, like a father to this child in the most fundamental way possible. He had literally breathed life into him. No court document or bloodline could ever match that. They named the boy William Thomas McReady. Elena wrote it in the family Bible with a steady hand in the space Thomas had left. The act felt sacred. Little Will, as he was called, was fragile. He needed to be fed every 2 hours, kept constantly warm. The routine of the ranch adapted to his tiny needs. Thomas would take the night watch, walking the floor with Will so Elena could sleep for an hour. Jacob would carefully hold his brother, a look of awe on his face. The baby became the heartbeat of the house. a tiny symbol of their collective survival. But the world, as it always did, intruded. News of the premature birth traveled through Casper, fertilized by malicious gossip. The timeline was mathematically damning. Even those who had been sympathetic now raised eyebrows. At a town meeting 2 weeks later, the bank manager, Mr. Gable, approached Thomas. The conversation was quiet, polite, and devastating. "That loan for the new herd stock," Thomas, Gable said. "The bank board is concerned. With the new addition to your family and the circumstances, they see it as an increased risk. They're calling the note due in 60 days. It was financial sabotage. Without that loan, Thomas couldn't buy the cattle needed to make it through the next year. He would have to sell off land, or worse, lose the ranch entirely. Robert Pendleton's family might have called off their lawyer, but their poison had seeped into the well of the community. The attack was no longer about claiming the child. It was about strangling them economically, forcing them to fail on their own." Thomas came home that night looking older than Alina had ever seen him. He told her about the loan over a sparse supper. "We have 60 days, he said. I can try to sell the south pasture." "That's the best grazing land," she said, her mind, honed by months of reviewing his ledgers, immediately grasping the long-term disaster. "It's that or the roof over our heads," he replied, the weight of his powerlessness pressing him into his chair. Alina looked at Will, sleeping in a drawer they'd lined with blankets. She looked at the faces of her other children, who had finally started calling her Mama without thinking. She thought of the deed with her name on it, of the Bible with her son's name in it. This was her fight too, not just as a wife, but as a partner and owner. "What if we didn't sell?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Thomas looked up, exhausted. "What's the alternative? What if we made the land we have more valuable than anyone believes?" She laid out an idea that had been forming in her mind. The south pasture was good for grazing, but what if part of it was better for something else? On her train journey west, she'd read agricultural bulletins. She spoke of alfalfa, a crop that could feed more animals per acre than plain grass, that could be cut and stored for winter. She talked about irrigation from the creek, about dividing the field. It was risky, untested in their area, and required backbreaking labor and every cent they had left. "It's a gamble, Alina," Thomas said. "If it fails, we lose everything. If we do nothing, we lose everything slower," she countered, "and we will have let them win without a fight." He saw the fire in her eyes, the same defiant courage he'd seen on the train platform, but now it was directed, intelligent, and fiercely protective. She was not just suggesting a plan, she was claiming her role as co-architect of their future. He nodded slowly. "All right, we gamble." They gambled everything. Thomas sold his late wife's silver hairbrush and his own good saddle to buy the first alfalfa seed. He and Jacob worked from dawn till dusk, digging irrigation trenches by hand. Alina managed the house, the new baby, and the other children, and still came out each afternoon to plant seeds alongside them, Will bundled against her chest. The community of Casper watched this desperate enterprise with a mixture of pity and scorn. The McReady family, with their scandalous wife and her suspiciously early baby, were now literally digging their own grave, everyone said. Then a new complication arose. Will, at 6 weeks old, fell sick. It started with a cough, a small, wet sound that quickly deepened into a frightening rattle in his tiny chest. His fever spiked. The local doctor, when finally summoned, shook his head. "Croup. Sometimes they pull through, often they don't. Keep him warm, steam the room." It was a death sentence in polite terms. Alina refused to accept it. She remembered Maria, the herbal tea, the practical magic of the woman's hands. She sent Thomas to find her. He rode out and returned with Maria, who brought her grandmother, an ancient, wrinkled woman named Abulita. They took over the sick room. They used steam, yes, but also poultices of mustard and skunk cabbage, a tea of mullein and thyme. They sang quiet songs in Spanish. For 3 days and nights, the household held its breath. Thomas stayed by the door, his own breath matching the ragged, struggling pulls of his son. Alina never left the bedside, applying the poultices, dripping tea between Will's lips. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. The cough loosened. Will opened his eyes and let out a weak but clear cry of hunger. He would live. As Abulita left, she patted Thomas's arm. This one, she said, pointing to Will, then to Alina, and finally to Thomas. This one has many spirits fighting for him. You make a strong tree, many birds can nest. The medical crisis had passed, but it had cost them precious time and the last of their ready cash. The alfalfa was in the ground, but it was a race against the bank's deadline and the turning seasons. The strain began to show in subtle cracks. Thomas, terrified of losing all he'd built and the family he'd fought so hard to claim, became silent and withdrawn, working until he dropped. Alina, stretched thin between a convalescing baby, the other children, and the crushing anxiety of their debt, felt the old isolation creeping back. The breaking point was small. Thomas came in one evening, having discovered a section of their irrigation trench had collapsed, undoing days of work. He didn't speak, just sat at the table, head in his hands. Alina, trying to soothe a fussy Will, spilled a precious bottle of medicine Maria had left. The glass shattered on the floor. "It's just a bottle," Thomas muttered, not looking up. "To you it's a bottle," Alina snapped, her nerves frayed to nothing. "To me, it's the thing keeping my son alive. Do you even care about anything in this house that doesn't have a price tag or a fence around it?" The room went dead silent. The other children froze. Thomas looked up at her, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and something like betrayal. "You think that, after everything, you think I don't care?" "I think you care about the land first," she fired back, the fear and pressure of months spewing out. "The children and I are just the livestock that comes with it." It was the cruelest thing she could have said, and she knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Thomas stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. He stared at her, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Then he turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. He didn't come back that night. Alina cried herself to sleep, holding Will, sick with regret. She had attacked the very core of the man who had given her everything. At dawn, she found him asleep in the barn, curled in the hay next to his favorite mare. She knelt beside him. He opened his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean it. I'm just so afraid." He sat up, rubbing his face. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I am too, but you were wrong. The land, it's just dirt. It's the people on it that make it a home. You and these children, you're not the livestock. You're the reason I bother with the fence." It was the most eloquent thing he'd ever said to her. The reconciliation was quiet, but it welded them together stronger than before. They had faced shame, legal threats, birth, death, sickness, and debt. They had fought each other and forgiven. There was no pretense left between them. A week before the banknote was due, they rode together to the south pasture to face their failure or their future. What they saw stole the breath from their lungs. A sea of tender, green alfalfa shoots had broken through the dark earth, stretching in neat rows toward the sun. The gamble had worked. The crop was growing, and growing fast. Thomas looked at Alina, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his weathered face. It was the first real, unburdened smile she had ever seen from him. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she corrected, taking his hand. They had their answer, they had their hope. But as they rode back to the house, a dark rider appeared on the ridge, watching them. It was the lawyer Dobbs. He had seen the green shoots too, and he knew a dying ranch when he saw one. This one was very much alive. The game had just changed, and the final, most dangerous battle for the Bar M was about to begin. Dobbs didn't ride down to confront them. He turned his horse and vanished over the ridge, a messenger carrying news that would change the nature of the attack. Thomas and Alina watched him go, the earlier joy at the sprouting field now tempered by a cold vigilance. They had shown their hand. The enemy knew they were not defeated. 3 days later, the official notice arrived, not from the bank, but from the Territorial Land Office. It cited an obscure statute regarding improper conveyance of marital property. It claimed Thomas's addition of Alina's name to the deed, while his first wife's children were minors, constituted a potential dilution of their inheritance and required a court review. The process could freeze their ability to borrow against or sell the land for months, if not years. It was a legal spiderweb, designed not to steal the land outright, but to paralyze them until the bank deadline passed and they defaulted. Thomas read the notice, his jaw set. "They're using the law like a ratchet," he said. Turn it one click at a time until we are crushed. Elena took the paper. Her eyes, once prone to tears, were now dry and sharp. Then we don't play their game, she said. We change the game. Her plan was audacious. They would not wait for the court. They would go to the bank, not as supplicants, but as partners bringing a new business proposal. They would use the alfalfa field as living collateral, but more than that, they would offer the bank a share in their success. She proposed selling the first cuttings' yield in advance, at a discount, to a consortium of nearby ranchers she'd heard were struggling with feed. She had drafted the contracts herself. Thomas looked at the papers, at her precise handwriting outlining numbers and terms. When did you do this? While you were digging trenches, she said. I was building bridges. They rode into Casper the next day, not in their worn wagon, but on horseback, side by side. They walked into the bank and asked to see Mr. Gable and the entire board. The bankers, expecting a plea for mercy, were confronted instead with a business proposition. Elena spoke, her voice clear and steady. She presented the contracts for the pre-sold alfalfa, the calculations showing the increased yield per acre, the plan to repay the loan in full with the profits from the first 2 cuttings. One board member, an old rancher named Peterson, squinted at her. That's a mighty pretty crop of numbers, ma'am, but alfalfa's a gamble here. A dry spell, a blight. Elena didn't blink. She reached into her bag and placed a small, clear jar on the table. Inside was a clump of dark earth, and nestled in it, a thick, healthy alfalfa sprout, its roots visibly tangled and strong. This is from the south pasture, gentlemen. The gamble has already sprouted. We are not asking you to bet on a possibility. We are asking you to invest in a fact. The room was silent. Thomas stood beside her, a solid, silent pillar of support. He finally spoke, his words few. I've worked this land for 20 years. I've never seen anything grow like this. My wife, he said the word with a weight that made Elena's throat tight. My wife saw what the land could be, not just what it was. I trust her sight. Old man Peterson leaned forward, a grudging respect in his eyes. He looked at Thomas. You vouch for this. With my life and my land, Thomas said. After a tense deliberation, the board agreed. They would extend the loan, using the future alfalfa crop as specific collateral. The legal challenge from the land office would still hang over them, but with operating capital, they could fight. The victory was monumental but short-lived. As they left the bank, they found a small crowd gathered. Dobbs was there speaking quietly with the town sheriff. He had a new paper. This one was a subpoena. It was for Elena. A petition had been filed in a Cheyenne court by concerned parties back east, requesting a determination of paternity for the child, William McReady, citing potential fraud upon the realm of inheritance. They were coming for Will, not the land, not the money, but the child himself, the ultimate poison. If a court even entertained the question, the scandal would follow Will forever. Thomas saw the blood drain from Elena's face. He stepped between her and the sheriff. On what grounds? He demanded. The sheriff, a decent man caught in the middle, looked uncomfortable. They've brought a witness, Mr. McReady, a man who claims he was engaged to Mrs. McReady and knew her prior to her coming west. He's prepared to testify to the timeline. Robert Pendleton, he had not come himself, but he had provided a sworn affidavit, his final, cowardly act of destruction. The hearing was set for 2 weeks hence in Cheyenne. The journey alone was a burden. The cost of a lawyer would cripple them again, but the true cost was the terror in Elena's eyes. They could fight for land, but how did you fight for a child's soul, for his right to his own name? That night, Thomas sat at the table with a blank sheet of paper. He was not a man of letters. He wrote slowly, painfully. Elena, putting the children to bed, saw him and paused. What are you doing? Writing the truth, he said, not looking up. My truth. He wrote a statement, not for a lawyer, but for the judge. He wrote of finding a woman of courage on a platform. He wrote of a partnership forged in dust and hope. He wrote of breathing life into a tiny blue body, of fighting for every breath of that child's first months. He wrote of a boy who had his eyes, his stubbornness, and who was learning to call him Papa. He did not mention blood. He wrote only of love and of claim. He signed it Thomas McReady, father. He then did something else. He wrote a second letter to Robert Pendleton. It was brief. It read, You had your chance to be a father. You chose not to be. I am choosing every day. If you proceed, you will not be challenging me. You will be challenging the man who raised the son you abandoned, and I will show the world the difference between a father by accident and a father by choice. Withdraw your petition. Let the boy live in peace." He sent both letters, the statement to the court, the challenge to Robert, not knowing if either would matter. The night before they were to leave for Cheyenne, a hard spring rain pounded the roof. Thomas was checking the horses when he saw a lone rider splashing into the yard. It was the sheriff. Thomas met him on the porch, his heart a cold stone. "No need for the trip," the sheriff said, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. "Petition been withdrawn, full retraction." The witness recanted his affidavit. Thomas stood stunned. "Why?" The sheriff shrugged. "Got your letter, I expect. Sometimes a man needs to be reminded what he's really fighting for and what he's fighting against." He tipped his hat. "The boy's yours, McReady, in the eyes of the law and every other way that counts." The storm had passed. The final external threat was gone. The Pendletons, faced with Thomas's raw, unvarnished claim and the prospect of a public battle against a man who embodied the frontier ideal of fatherhood, had retreated. They wanted a quiet scandal, not a heroic legend. Summer arrived in full glory. The alfalfa grew chest-high, a lush purple sea that hummed with bees. The harvest was backbreaking, but it yielded enough to pay off the banknote in full and leave a surplus for the first time in years. The town of Casper, seeing the success, began to shift its view. The scandalous wife became the clever Mrs. McReady. The man who had taken her in became a figure of respect, not ridicule. One evening, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Thomas and Elena sat on the porch. The air was sweet with cut hay and honeysuckle. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He handed it to Elena. Inside was a simple gold locket. She opened it. On one side was a tiny, perfect likeness of Will. On the other, a curl of dark hair from each of the other 4 children. She looked at him, speechless. "It's not much," he said, his voice rough, "but it's full. This family, it's full because of you." Elena closed the locket and held it tight. She looked out at their land, at the garden she had planted, at the swing Thomas had hung for the children from the old cottonwood. "It's enough," she said. "It's more than enough." Years unspooled like a strong, smooth thread. The Bar M prospered. Jacob grew into a capable rancher, taking on more responsibility. The twins, Mary and Michael, showed a talent for numbers and animals, respectively. Ruth, with Elena's gentle guidance, became a teacher in the town's new school. And Will, the boy who had fought so hard to enter the world, grew sturdy and bright, with his father's steady gaze and his mother's quick mind. He never once questioned his place. On his 18th birthday, Thomas gathered the family. He handed each child, including Will, a sealed envelope. Inside were the updated deeds, showing the equal division of the ranch into 5 shares, no more, no less. The promise made on a train platform a lifetime ago had been kept in full. Thomas and Elena grew old together, their bond a quiet, deep-rooted thing, weathered by storms but unbreakable. When Thomas passed at the age of 72, he was buried on a hill overlooking the south pasture, the one that had almost broken them, but instead had saved them all. Elena lived another 10 years. In her final days, she asked to be driven to that hill. She sat in her wheelchair, while now a grown man with children of his own beside her. She looked out at the ranch, at the legacy that had sprung from a claim made in desperation and honored in love. "You know," she said to Will, her voice soft but clear, "your father once told me that affection grows like a crop. It needs good ground and work and time." "Did it grow, Grandma?" her young granddaughter asked. Elena smiled, taking in the vast, beautiful view of the family she had built. "Oh, my dear," she said, "it bloomed." The ranch still stands today, though the wooden sign at the gate no longer reads Bar M, it reads McReady Family Homestead. The south pasture, that field of desperation and hope, still yields alfalfa every summer. The house has been added onto, modernized, but the core timbers, the ones that held the weight of so much silence and then so much life, remain. Travelers on the old road sometimes stop to read the historical marker placed there by the county. It speaks of early agricultural innovation and hardy settlers. It does not mention a train platform, a lilac dress, or a breath given to a blue baby. The most important parts of history are often written in the quiet spaces between the official words. The story of Thomas and Alina McReady asks a question that echoes far beyond the Wyoming prairie. What is the true foundation of a family? Is it blood or is it choice? Is it the circumstances of a beginning or the steadfastness of a continuation? In an age of strict social codes and desperate survival, they built an answer. It was not a fairy tale. It was a negotiation that became a partnership, a claim that became a commitment. A business arrangement that, watered by shared struggle and quiet respect, grew into a love as deep and enduring as the roots of that old cottonwood. He saw a solution to a practical problem. She saw a refuge from a social death. Together, they forged a dynasty. Their legacy wasn't just in the land they preserved or the wealth they built, but in the profound truth they lived, that a parent is not merely a biological fact, but a conscious, daily act of claiming. That a home is not just a shelter, but a story you choose to build together, one deliberate day at a time. In the end, the man who rejected her on the platform gave her a name no one wanted. The man who claimed her there gave her a name that built a future. That is the real, untold history of the West, not just of gold rushes and gunfights, but of broken people gathering the scattered pieces of their lives and finding, in the mosaic, a picture more beautiful than the original. So the next time you hear a story that begins with a scandal, pause, look for the claim. Look for the choice made in the dust after everyone else has turned away. For sometimes, the greatest loves, the strongest families, and the most enduring legacies do not begin with a promise, but with a simple, unwavering decision to stay. If you found this story of redemption and resilience compelling, delve into more forgotten histories with us. Subscribe for more documentaries that explore the hidden corners where real life became legend. Thank you for watching.